Debt is only bad if you buy bad things with it. You always hear the term, get out of debt, don't have debt, it's bad, you'll go bankrupt and all the rest of it. But then you look at some of the largest companies and the most wealthy people in the world and they just carry a huge amount of debt. And you go, well, if debt is bad, then why do the wealthiest people in the world carry so much of it? But what we're often not taught, and the lesson that I got from Robert Kiyosaki, is that debt is not created equally. You have good debt and you have bad debt. The difference between good debt and bad debt is that bad debt is tied to bad things like liabilities, right? So if you've got debt like credit cards or personal loans, etc., for things that depreciate in value, you don't get tax benefits out of them, that is bad debt, and that's the debt you should run the other direction from. Whereas good debt is tied to assets. Assets are things that appreciate in value, the government gives us tax concessions on, and it's debt that often devalues over time. And what I mean by devalues over time is that as asset values get more expensive, the same level of debt becomes less relative. And if I use the example, we had $1.5 million of debt, which was tied to $2 million worth of assets, and we had $500,000 worth of equity. We still had $1.5 million worth of debt 10 years later, but the asset value was no longer $2 million, it was $4 million. And all of a sudden, that $1.5 million of debt doesn't seem so relative anymore because the assets that it's tied to are $4 million, which essentially means it's less than 50% of the value is debt. Whereas 10 years prior, when it was $1.5 million of $2 million worth of assets, 75% of your asset value was tied to debt. So over time, if the debt is tied to assets and those assets appreciate in value, even if you don't pay any of the debt off, it just becomes less and less relative. And that's essentially because of a multitude of reasons. As the governments print more money, asset values inflate, which means your debt level deflates. But essentially, all you need to know, debt is not created equally. So the way to know whether it's a good debt or a bad debt is to go, well, is the debt tied to something which increases in value, which generates me money, which gets tax concessions, or is the debt tied to something that costs me money, decreases in value over time, like a car, for example, doesn't give me any tax concessions, and is actually a liability on my personal balance sheet?